Since the dawn of Christianity, there have been thousands of saints that have been recognized by the Catholic Church, which got me wondering, what exactly is a saint anyways? What does it mean to become a saint? What is the process like, and who votes on this sort of thing anyways? I was so enamored with these questions, I had no choice but to travel all the way to Italy so I could try to become a saint myself. While I was there, I met plenty of other saints, including Pope Francis, the remains of Simon Peter, and even the incorruptible body of Padre Pio. And along the way, I desecrated plenty of ancient monuments while somehow not getting thrown in prison. So what can you do to become a saint? Well, you're about to find out when Caleb goes to Italy. Now, Wednesday morning at Vatican City is a very special occasion, because every Wednesday morning, Pope Francis comes riding out on his signature motorcade like a straight baller. And the lines to get into Vatican City are absolutely nuts. Our tour group waited in line over an hour just so we could sit all the way in the back. Pope Francis is different from all the other popes, though. Pope Francis is a straight rock star who somehow managed to bring Catholicism to the mainstream. Seriously, dude's like the Jay-Z of popes. People might think stuff like this is tacky and in bad taste, especially for someone who's a messenger of God, but the fact that Francis is so cool and so well-liked among so many young people is pretty rad, even if it is in a purely ironic sort of way. And what's really crazy is Pope Francis really isn't even that well-liked in the Catholic community. When I was on my trip, I talked to some people who straight up wanted to impeach him and replace him with another pope. There's a lot of reasons that Catholics don't like Pope Francis, like trying to change certain traditions and trying to get rid of Latin Mass. I even talked to one guy who was really mad at Pope Francis because he supported an open border policy, even though the Vatican doesn't have an open border themselves. Except they do. You can literally just walk right in. As soon as Pope Francis came rolling out, people were cheering and hooting and hollering and raising their phones in the air. It really was like being at a rock show. Pope Francis would stop, pick up the little bambinos, give them some smooches, and then give them back to their moms. Hopefully the right moms. Then he made his way on stage in front of a giant crowd of people. He was so far away, he looked like just a teeny tiny little speck. Thank goodness they had these big LCD screens so we could see him better.
The Holy See, sponsored by Samsung.
I was kind of expecting him to go on stage and start freestyling, but instead Pope Francis gave a few speeches about current events, offering prayers and well wishes to people all over the world. His speeches were translated in a number of different languages like English and French and Spanish and so on and so forth. Then he capped it off by blessing the entire crowd, which I gotta say was pretty dang cool. It's not every day that you get a blessing from the Pope, so checkmate, atheists. I'll leave a link in the description on how you can get tickets for the papal audience so you can go visit Pope Francis yourself. Typically it happens every Wednesday morning unless he's like busy playing Doom or something. As you might know, Pope Francis has been dealing with some pretty serious health issues recently. It was really difficult for him to get up and walk, which was kind of sad to see. But the fact that he's doing these kind of events at all, especially while there was a synod going on, was honestly really impressive. Which begs the question, what exactly does the Pope do anyways? Well, simply put, he's the leader of the Catholic Church. Duh. That might seem obvious enough, but this is actually one of the things that sets the Catholic Church apart from other denominations. Other denominations usually don't have a central authority figure, even if there is some sort of hierarchy going on. Since the Pope is the central authority figure, he has the power to make the big decisions, keep the Church involved in current events, and keep diplomatic relations with other countries, as long as the country doesn't keep changing its name constantly. Seriously, this is why Micronesia will forever be a godless place. The Catholic Church has a complete record of all the popes who have descended from St. Peter. This includes the second pope, St. Linus, who's briefly mentioned in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 21. Does this mean that every pope would be considered a patron saint? No. Not at all, in fact. The first 35 popes, down to St. Julius I, were all venerated as patron saints. But then, along came Pope Liberius, who screwed it all up, since he may or may not have been a heretic. Honestly, kinda depends on who you ask. Either way, let's blame him. Even the people in our tour group admitted there have been some really nasty popes throughout the history of the church. I won't go into all the bad stuff they've done, but suffice to say, even if you're the pope, it doesn't automatically grant you any kind of sainthood. The pope might be a vessel through which God speaks, but just like the apostle who betrayed Jesus, any vessel can give in to the devil and become corrupted. Does this make the church any less credible? I don't think so. If anything, we should learn from their example and make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, the Pope is so cool, he even has his own set of museums known as the Vatican Museums. And I made an attempt to go check out the Vatican Museums. The key word here being attempt. If you want to know what visiting the Vatican Museums is like, I'm going to give you the full museum experience right now. Well, there you have it. You just got the full Vatican Museum experience. Now you don't have to go there anymore. And if you do go there, you better get there early in the morning, not in the middle of the day when you're constantly being herded along like cattle and you can't even stop to look at anything. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that either. The security guards were constantly like, don't stop, just keep walking, move along people, something to see here. So with what little information I was able to gather while being herded through the Vatican Museums, there were some tombs, and some Egyptian statues, and some statues of some emperor guys. And then there was paints on the ceiling, and there was some baby, and there was some guy. Seriously, that was about all the information that I could get. Because anytime our tour guide tried to tell us something, all I could hear was... But it was all good though, because I did get to see a map of the country that we were already in. That being said though, it was pretty rad to see the original, the OG statues of Roman emperors like Caligula and Julius Caesar. They were scratched up and had pieces broken off, but somehow that just made them even cooler. Something about the imperfection just adds to the authenticity and reminds you how old these guys really are. I'm speaking specifically about the circumcision gone wrong, in which the tip of this dude's junk is broken off. So eventually we made it to the grand finale of the tour, which just so happened to be the one, the only Sistine Chapel. And as the name implies, the Sistine Chapel is still very much a chapel. It's a holy place where people come from all over the world to be able to worship. Which is why it really bugs me when people cannot pull themselves away from their phones for 2 seconds so they can read the signs that say no phones allowed. And it also really bugs me when people cannot stop talking and be quiet for 2 seconds. Seriously, there were signs posted everywhere that said no phones and no talking. And the poor security guards kept having to remind people, sir, this is a Wendy's. You can't do that here. If those people could read, I'm sure they would be very upset. So here's what you really need to know about the Sistine Chapel. All the pictures that you see online do not do it justice. All these pictures right here, yeah, they're hot garbage. You really need to be there and see it to believe it. The chapel is nearly 7 stories tall and has been decorated by some of the most incredible paintings ever done by a human being. That's right, I'm looking at you, Michelangelo. Michelangelo, the guy who somehow managed to paint an entire ceiling while working from a scaffolding even though he hated painting. That last part is actually true. For some reason, Mikey wanted to make sculptures instead, which would be like if Mozart came out and said, hey, you know what? The symphony stuff sucks, dude. Making NFTs is where it's at. The creation of Adam, which everybody on the face of the planet knows and has seen at some point in their lifetime, is actually really, really small compared to the rest of the ceiling. Like, seriously small. This is it. Seriously, it could have been an NFT. The creation of Adam is only one part of a much larger fresco, which depicts the early chapters of the book of Genesis. There's paintings of when God created the earth, all the way to the Great Flood when humans ruined it like they always do. Then there's the Last Judgment, which takes up literally an entire freaking wall. And you know what the funny thing about the Last Judgment is? So apparently our boy Michelangelo was feuding with the Pope at the time. So much so that he drew the Pope as Minos, the judge of the underworld, completely naked with a snake biting his groin. It was so ridiculous and so juvenile, I had to stop myself from laughing. Credit where credit is due though, Michelangelo did not paint the entire Sistine Chapel. There's other frescoes running along the walls that were done by other artists from around that same time period. There's paintings from the life of Moses all the way to the life of Jesus. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the names of all these artists, but here you go. Now, another thing you have to understand about the Pope is that the Pope is a very busy guy. Therefore, it makes sense that the Pope would want someplace where he could go relax and unwind and maybe play some Stardew Valley or something. Enter the Papal Palace of Castel Gandolfo. Try saying that 3 times fast. The papal residence was originally a castle until it was purchased by the Vatican back in 1596. Since then, it served as the Pope's home away from home, where he could kick back and relax and not have to listen to all the sirens in Rome constantly. Occasionally, the Pope will meet with world leaders like President Barack Obama and George W. Bush, both of whom have visited the Papal Palace in the past. Originally, the Papal Palace was closed off, so the general public wasn't allowed to go in. But when Pope Francis came along, he was just like, I ain't going in either. Sure enough, Pope Francis has only been here once, or maybe twice, maybe 3 times, who knows. Either way, he was kind enough to open the Papal Palace to the public. So now it's come on in, everybody's invited. You can visit the Papal Gardens, you can visit the Papal House and see all the papal rooms that have been inhabited by all sorts of papal papas from over the years. This place is huge too, so huge that realistically one man does not need all this space to himself. So with that being said, it was very nice of Pope Francis to open this place to the public so that way everybody could come in and enjoy the scenery. Even though the Papal Palace is located on the west coast of Italy, it's still considered Vatican territory. So technically when you step into the Papal Palace, you're stepping into another country. So when we first got there, we went on a tram ride around the Palace Gardens, which was pretty spectacular. In fact, I am formally certifying the Palace Gardens as being dank. As you can see, the amount of time and care and effort that goes into maintaining these gardens is pretty mind-boggling. What was not spectacular was how terrifying the tram rides were. At one point, the tram stalled right as we were going uphill, and it very quickly started rolling back into a ditch. But thankfully, the driver was able to restart it really quickly, hit the gas, and get us back up that hill. So kudos to the driver, I guess. As you're driving around the Palace Gardens, you'll spot ancient walls that have been there for thousands of years. There's even a tunnel with a cross at the very end of it. How did it get there? I don't know. Just by looking at the ceiling though, you can see the centuries of history written all over it. The Papal Palace even has its own farm where they raise all sorts of livestock, like sheep, chicken, and pigs. And honestly, the chicken huts are bigger and more luxurious than some apartments I've seen in some major cities. Not even exaggerating. We ended up driving around for well over a half hour, and even then I'm pretty sure we didn't get to see everything there was to see. Eventually we went inside the actual Papal Palace, and as soon as you walk in, they have a whole bunch of Pope-mobiles on display. And yes, they are historically called Pope-mobiles. The most notable Pope-mobile is the Range Rover, which has a giant protective casing around it for obvious reasons. Nowadays, the inside of the palace serves more as a museum than anything else. All the rooms are filled with paintings of all sorts of popes from over the centuries. They even have outfits that have been worn by some of the cardinals and Swiss guards over the years. Eventually, we got to see the Pope's private altar, where he could celebrate Holy Mass every single day. So I didn't realize this at the time, but the Pope usually doesn't conduct Mass, even if it's within his own residency. Instead, he'll just have another priest do it for him, which makes me think about how nerve-wracking it must be to hold Mass in front of the Pope of all people. Like, imagine trying to make fried chicken in front of Colonel Sanders. The altar is just outside the Pope's private bedroom, which is mostly empty except for a bed that looks super-duper comfy, I have to say. Though unfortunately, this is the same room where two popes have passed away. Pope Paul VI, followed by Pope Pius XII, respectively. You might remember Pius XII from my first video as the Pope who spearheaded the search to find where St. Peter was buried. After that, you go into the Pope's private office, which is where he spends most of his time working on matters related to the church. Just next to his office, there's a couple meeting rooms where the Pope would occasionally meet with the President and other world leaders. But of course, the Pope always gets the best seat in the house. It's in his contract that he must always have the coolest looking chair no matter where he goes. I just made that last part up, but it would not surprise me if it was true. This was one of my favorite parts of my trip to Italy simply because it was so quiet and relaxing. If you're looking for a fun day of sightseeing that's also not very crowded, the Papal Palace is the place for you. The Papal Palace is in the town of Castel Gandolfo, which is only about 16 miles southeast of Rome. It's worth taking a day trip out there, though keep in mind you will need to buy a ticket if you want to check out the Papal Palace. I'll leave a link in the description below on how you can get tickets for yourself, and unfortunately you will not get to sleep in the Pope's bed or use the Pope's bathroom. Believe me, I tried, and I was promptly escorted out.